Hello. Thank you. First of all, thank you for having us, Chicago Roboto. My name is Jamie Dihiansan. I'm a designer at Basecamp. How many designers are here? 0? Okay. Enemy territory. So before Basecamp, I was just a web designer, actually. And I'm pretty new to Android. Well, actually, I've been with Android, been using Android since Nexus 4, so KitKat. But designing for Android has been pretty new. We're a pretty new team. And so I'm excited to talk to you about how we work together.
And I'm Jay Ohms. I'm one of the programmers at Basecamp on the Android team. And like Jamie said, we started the Android team about 4 years ago. We joined the team, so it's fairly new for a company that's been established. Basecamp has a long web history going back to the early 2000s, so we had to come in and try to incorporate our own processes on the mobile side for a company that's very web and desktop focused.
So first of all, is this disclaimer. Basecamp is a weird company, and I say this because, well, how many people are familiar with Basecamp? Well, okay, so about half. The founders of Basecamp are super opinionated, and a lot of the criticism that people have about Basecamp is, oh, we're not like you, we can never be like you. So we're going to say a bunch of stuff, and I hope that we're going to take something out of it, but I don't want you to tune out and think, okay, we're never going to be like this, or my company's not going to be like this. So at the end of the presentation, we're going to have some points that I hope you can take back to your company or to your team.
Yeah, if your team, I'm sure, has its own processes and ways of working, but hopefully you can take a few nuggets of how we choose to work, and maybe it can influence in some small ways how your team works.
So on that note, here's what the Android team at Basecamp is like. We're one designer, that's me, and 2 programmers, Jay and Dan, who's there up front. And that's it. There's no project manager, there's no senior designer, there's no junior programmer. It's just 3 people, and we're responsible for the app.
Another thing about our team is Android is, compared to iOS, a minority compared to for our customer base, and also for people using Android within the company. So this has some pros and cons. Some of the pros are that we're able to experiment a little bit more creatively on the Android side because less people are paying attention to what we're doing. So it allows us some more flexibility in how we approach our design. And on the flip side, some of the cons are that we have to be more proactive about influencing Android design into the product, about also getting visibility for our work amongst the rest of the company. So those are things that we're always working on and being proactive about. But depending on your company, you may be more heavy Android or more heavy iOS. But we fall on the minority on our side.
And we also have an autonomous work environment. So there's no one telling us what to do. There's a high level sort of goal. Obviously, we can't make a mobile game like we're a project management tool. But within those constraints, we can decide what we want to work on, whether it's fixing bugs or building new features or trying something new. As long as it's in the app, and we kind of decide what we want to work on.
we get the high-level directives, and then from there, it's our team's responsibility to figure out what things we work on, how we work on them, the implementation strategy, priorities, all that stuff. And we also work in 6-week cycles, so the whole company as a whole is always working in 6-week chunks. And so on the Android team, we're responsible for outlining what we're going to work on. And we often pick a theme for a cycle. So picking a theme, it varies dependently over the years, but we'll try to lump similar items together. And we'll also try to balance user visible changes with backend changes. And usually, since we have 2 programmers, for example, Dan might be working on a backend thing, and I might be working on a front-end thing. And that way we're not colliding with each other, and it also lets us not get bored. We switch back and forth who's working on user visible stuff and also backend stuff.
And for within the 6-week cycle, we try to ship an update every 2 weeks, or we try to break up the work in 2-week increments. And that's so that we can maintain momentum and we're not sort of stuck in design mode for 6 weeks. We try to keep moving and keep pushing the projects forward.
Yeah, we focus much more heavily on the timeline and cutting scope side for shipping a feature, rather than letting features balloon out into, instead of 2 weeks, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks and longer. And then, so Basecamp's philosophy, a lot of our work boils down to philosophy we call Getting Real, which is actually a book that Basecamp published in 2006. And it outlines the process for building successful web applications, because back in 2006, that was kind of all that was relevant. But it still holds true for mobile development today in a lot of ways. And one of the kind of frameworks that Getting Real follows is that it forces you to deal with the actual problems you're trying to solve instead of the ideas about those problems. It forces you to deal with reality. And we're going to talk about how what this means in day-to-day practice.
So the first point is that there's no design specs. And this echoes back to the roots of Basecamp, how Basecamp began as a web app. Designers, it was HTML, CSS, and it's easier for designers to just update the design themselves rather than to create a Photoshop file with specs and pixels and stuff like that and send it to a programmer to develop. So we sort of carried that on throughout the company, and we've extended that with the app as well.
Other thing is that designers and programmers work really closely together. Throughout the entire process, the designer and programmer is involved working together the entire time. There's no upfront design and then a handoff spec to a programmer. We're working together and iterating through our work really quickly. And one of the things, this is just tweet I saw the other day, that kind of gets at the heart of some of the problems that can come up when you don't, when the designers and programmers aren't working together. A designer can add some really nice elements to a design, but it may be a very costly thing on the programming side. And then, unless you have a quick feedback loop, that can waste a lot of time and resources. It's not really criticism of design, it's more criticism of the process of how to develop. And this was a follow-up that she said that I'd prefer to be more involved in the beginning of the process and not just get handed mock-ups and ask any questions. And for us, it's not even just being involved at the beginning, but being involved during the entire process of building a feature.
And I also want to echo back to that point. Designers do some coding, so it's not like I'm a unicorn or a Kotlin developer. but I can get in there, update XML, I can update variables, I can pick different drawables. And I think that's important because I'm able to test the design on my device or build the app, and Jay doesn't have to mess around with any display stuff. He can concentrate on making it work.
Yeah, and part of our process is committing very frequently, and Jamie as a designer is able to pull that stuff down, make tweaks and changes, and I can carry on with the next thing, and I don't have to worry about a lot of the nitpicks. We'll get there eventually towards the end of the process of polish, where maybe there's some things that he's not able to do by himself. But as a general rule, he's able to go in there and tweak the layouts, and that's a real big help to me. So one of our core philosophies at Basecamp, as a remote company, almost everyone works remotely every day at Basecamp, is writing things out. It's our most important form of communication, and not just quick chats, but actually long-form writing. We think it's really helpful, and it's helpful in a lot of ways. It means that you put upfront thought into something that you're thinking about. It means that you it allows other people to slow down and read something in context and not just in a quick stream of consciousness. And it also gives you something to refer back to later on. And this is really helpful for, in a lot of ways, and even onboarding new people. It's really helpful to say, hey, all this is documented. All of our thought processes, how we got here, is all written out. One of the main things that we do is we'll often write pitches. And pitches are something that anyone in the company can do. Basecamp's about 50 people, so just to give you some context. And anyone, if they want to, can write a pitch to the entire company, which is, it might be a product feature, it might be something that should be fixed, it might be a way to streamline something, but it's a long form written out idea that presents an idea for further feedback or consideration. And a lot of times it influences how we work on our cycles. Here's an example of a pitch that Dan made, which was, this is just a small, basically like small UI change, which was moving a menu from one part of the screen to another because he thought it would be really helpful. And this was something that was on the web app, not in our Android app, but even still, he wanted to help influence the core product, and this is one of the ways that we do that at Basecamp.
I just want to also point out that Dan didn't develop a technical spec or any super in-depth thing like this is how we're going to make it work. He just sort of pitched the idea, and that's how everything starts at Basecamp is the idea, and if people are into the idea, then we go forth and build it. So we also have a part of the process called Kickoff, which is before each 6-week cycle, we, again, write kind of like a statement of work. These are the projects that we're going to work on. And some of it might be, again, like fixing bugs from the last cycle, or it might be tackling new work. But really what it is it helps us, again, just kind of promise, okay, this is what we're going to do in these 6 weeks. And we try to be as realistic as possible. We don't shoot for the moon. It doesn't matter how many things are in there, as long as we're really able to do it. And this is something that we talk amongst ourselves, and we say, okay, do you want to work on this? Do we want to do this? And one of us writes up posts for the entire company. So our company is pretty small. We're 50 or so people. But again, since not everybody uses the Android app, it gives people insight into what we're working on and how that matches up to what they're working on. So this is one that we did for what we're calling Cycle 3. And Jay is just outlining, okay, this is what we're going to do.
So while kickoffs happen at the beginning of a cycle, the bookend of that is heartbeats, which happen at the end of a cycle. And heartbeat is just a term that we use to describe the conclusion and reflection on the cycle. So every team at Basecamp does this. And for heartbeats, we outline what we worked on, what we accomplished, what we failed to accomplish that we had in our original kickoff, any challenges that came up, any emergencies that may have come up during the cycle, whether it was a serious crash issue that we just had to stop things and work, set stuff aside and work on a new thing. All of that stuff is outlined in our heartbeat, and it gives us a chance to just show what we worked on, but also allow people to get insight into our team, which is sometimes difficult at larger companies. Here's an example of a heartbeat that Jamie wrote up, and it's basically an outline, and this is just a fraction of the piece, but it just outlines every single thing that we did, and it's a really, writing it up in long form is a really great way to reflect later and be able to see what we did. So
what we want to do is walk you through a real feature, a real project from the app, and it's called the Hey menu, which if you've ever used Basecamp, it's basically like a notifications menu type of thing.
Just a list of notifications.
And then we could show you the next slide. So this here is the Hey menu in the web app. This is an Electron app, so that's why it looks kind of weird. But it's the web. And what you see is a block that's new for you. So these are new notifications. The ones at the top with those icons, those are chat rooms in Basecamp. It's kind of like Slack, but we call them campfires. And the two at the bottom here, those are posts, message posts, and an answer to an automated question. And one thing to note is, first of all, it works fine in the web. This is how the web is today. We have not changed any design. But we thought that we could make it better on the Android app, but we weren't sure what to do. And this is the iOS app, actually, too. So they both are the same thing, and they have not changed. We didn't change any of the design. But you'll see the elements that we have are avatar, the project that it's part of, the title, the name of the person that posted it, and a timestamp. And it works pretty well, but again, we thought, okay, maybe there's a way to do it better.
So we had some main areas of motivation to see if we could improve the Hey menu in the Android app. We use the app every day. Using Basecamp is how we build Basecamp, which is, I think, a unique opportunity for us, which is gives us a lot of insight into all the pain points that are present in the app. We're one of the heaviest users of it. One of the things that we saw was you often don't know what's behind the tap for a notification, so there wasn't a ton of context in each of the notifications. And there's also a lot of context switching that you had to do. Chat room notifications come in pretty frequently, whereas some of the other notifications for messages, events come in more slowly. So there's a lot of context switching that we would have to do in the Android app.
And we've been thinking about this for a few months. So we're using Basecamp, and as we choose to work on things for those 6-week cycles, it was sort of in the back of our heads, like maybe we should improve this. None of us had a really good idea yet how to do it, so we kind of like delayed it. But it was one of those things that was kind of percolating.
The other thing, we had a unique situation where we were in between cycles, where we had a little bit of a gap. We had a couple of weeks where we didn't have anything slated for that time period. So we thought, okay, this is a perfect opportunity. We have a company meetup coming up in a couple weeks, which is where the whole company comes together since we're remote. So we'll be able to show this feature to people in person, which we normally don't get to do.
The other thing too is since Android is a minority at our company, we wanted to do something that would sort of make the iOS team feel bad. So really, what we do to start a project is just have a brief conversation. We don't have these formal meetings. We're a remote company, even though Dan, Jay, and I live in Chicago, we never see each other, unfortunately. We all work in virtually Basecamp. So we had a brief conversation. The brief conversation was basically, maybe we can make it kind of like Inbox.
RIP.
Yeah. But there was something about the bundling and the way to sort of triage the inbox that we liked about the concept. So what we then do is a rough sketch of the UI. So if you remember initially, I don't do design specs at all. I don't start to design the app in Photoshop or even in some web thing. I just sort of do a rough sketch. And what I mean by that is, if you go down, there's a band shell in the living part designed by this architect, Frank Gehry, who's a famous architect. And it's a beautiful, striking structure with these metal plates. And really, what's funny is that he doesn't start with detailed CAD drawings at all. He just does these gestural scribbles, right? But what some people say, okay, well, that's kind of crap. But what it does is it gets to the idea of the structure of the actual final piece. And so those were sketches for the Guggenheim Museum at Bilbao, and this is the final product. So what we try to do is something similar, which is sort of, okay, let's try to get what elements are on the page roughly. Things don't have to be sized perfectly. It's just sort of like, okay, I guess there's going to be an avatar. Maybe there'll be a title. Maybe there'll be timestamp. I don't know. But we're not like detailing everything right now.
So when we start working on a new feature, we try to hone in on what's the main concept that we're trying to achieve here. A lot of the small details are kind of secondary to what's the main concept and how can we make the main concept of what we're building start to get real and start to be able to make it usable in the app as quickly as possible. So for this specific feature, it was bundling. We wanted to be able to bundle and group different things, different notifications together in a way that we thought could be more helpful for people using the Android app.
So this is the first thing that we wanted to bundle was campfires, the chat rooms, because those felt like they could kind of fit together, and we just wanted to see how it worked. So this was something that we did. We uploaded it into Basecamp, and this is how we start to discuss things together. We're not doing meetings, but we're sort of in touch throughout the day, sharing ideas and concepts. So here I mocked up what a bundled campfire thing would look like, but I didn't make it like perfect. I'm right here, like I'm not showing around the corners, however I think we're going to need them. So it's just sort of like starting to get the idea.
And for me, when Jamie shows me something, I know that the first things that we see are not going to be where we end up in the end. So I'm not concerned about polish in the beginning. I'm not so concerned about spacing items. I'm concerned about, okay, I want Jamie to be able to see this feature come to life as quickly as possible in whatever rough form it can take first. So that means preferring stock components in the beginning, especially. Maybe some custom elements might come in if we decide stock ones don't work. But for when bundling campfires was the first thing we knew we wanted to tackle. So I knew that within a day I wanted to be able to show Jamie, here's what it can look and feel like. And from there, that can help inform the next steps of where we go building this new feature.
So then we thought, okay, we have the campfires. Is there anything else that we can try to bundle? And here we're showing a thing called pings. And those are like our direct messages. And it felt kind of like a similar unit, where right now in the Basecamp web app, all this stuff is sort of scattered. It's in chronological order, but it's not grouped together. So now we have chats grouped together and direct messages grouped together.
And so even here, there are a ton of things that we haven't figured out yet. We just started to address the two of the main concepts that we wanted to do. And we're iterating very quickly. When Jamie and I were working on this feature, I was probably checking in code every 20 minutes or so, and Jamie's pulling that down and checking out the latest changes, giving me feedback, and we start to form the ideas of how we want this to take shape.
And that's when we're starting to iterate. So yep. I'm again I have my Pixel phone, and I'm building the app right on the device, and I can use it. We're using real data.
Yep. So after bundling, we knew that there was one more main concept that we wanted to address. So bundling we thought of less context switching. So grouping similar items together, you weren't switching context so often. We also wanted to add more context to each of the notifications. And so this involves showing more data for each thing. And so we didn't know exactly what that would look like. We have a lot of different concepts in Basecamp. We have pings, campfires, messages, events, to-dos, check-ins, a lot of different types of stuff. So we knew we'd have to start to go down the line and address each of these. But what we didn't do was design all of that up front.
So here, what we're starting to do is sort of layer in some context with campfires. And what's funny about this is this was actually something someone else in the company had asked us to do that we kind of put off until this point, where it kind of made sense to add it finally. So it was sort of like, hey, let's add the last person speaking in the chat.
The next thing that we wanted to do was, so we use cards for, just a card UI for the bundles, and we thought, okay, we're going to add more context to other types of notifications. Let's also reuse that card concept and try that out and see how it works, which involved, very quickly just adding card UI and then starting to layer in the pieces of more information and start to see how that takes shape.
You can see here too, I'm sort of like, I have questions here. I'm kind of like, I don't have everything fully formed yet. I'm just saying, there's no more header. What happens to the order of things? This is, because I don't really know what data Jay has to work with. I'm just kind of like, throwing this out there.
Yeah, it's a good example of kind of the getting real philosophy is designing up front is just kind of a guess until you see it for real. So this is part of asking questions while we're working on stuff. So the next thing, adding more context, we continued to layer on things. So Dan had actually just wrapped up a more sophisticated image viewer that allowed us to basically have a gallery of of infinite size, no matter where you were coming from. So coming from an app. So I thought, okay, we have the ability, we have this better image viewer. What if we are actually able to add image previews for notifications? Let's add more context, and it can give you a better clue as to whether you want to tap on that notification now and read it now. One of the things especially with work-related things, notifications come in, and choosing whether to read it on your phone or waiting until you sit down at your computer later is a question that comes up a lot. So,
and what's nice here too is this: if we didn't have a small team of one designer, two programmers, I don't know if we could have seen this coming together. Because I would think that other companies there would be like a project manager for the pay menu and a project manager for the image viewer, and those project managers probably don't talk to each other. But because I was a designer, I could work with. I saw what Dan was working on, I saw what Jay was working on, and we kind of said, "Hey, let's put this together." And then now we have a better feature, a fuller feature.
So one of the things that we do when we're happy with the actual feature, we've seen the feature come together. We've iterated a ton over like the span of a week or so, and we've seen that thing come to life. What we do then is we really start to zero in on separating concerns. So those are bugs with the current implementation, polish that we can layer in, and chatter, which is just what we call things that are nice to haves, things that we'll try to address them if we have time. But more than likely, they'll come in a later version. But we want to outline those ideas from the very beginning while we're working on the feature. Even if it comes in we're in V1 right now and it'll come in V2, then that's fine. But we have those to-dos grouped together, and we can come back to them.
We also have a concept called scope hammer, which is basically like things that that would be awesome to do, but they endanger us shipping the product within 2 weeks. And that's really important because we don't want to languish and have this thing kind of caught up for endless design, endless development.
Yeah, we focus very much. Our budget is the time. It's not the ideal. It's not the full ideal product that we'd like to ship. Knowing that we can continue to revise and iterate later.
So one of the things that we scope hammered or discussed was like, okay, after you have these new notifications, what happens with the ones that you already read? So if you remember, we had this working in the Android app. This is just a revision to it. And we basically decided, you know what, it's fine, the previously read ones are fine as is. We don't have to like add cards or do anything different there. Let's just keep it as it is. We don't have to waste time.
Yeah. One of the, this might sound weird, but our default, when we're working on a new feature and considering what things to scope, for things that weren't part of the main concept of the feature, our default is to do nothing. So, for example, we only make changes during a cycle when we think it's part of the core concept of what we're working on. And this is an easy way to cut scope if time is starting to run out.
This is another feature that I had an idea. Okay, maybe I can long press on a new notification, and if it's really like some of those campfire ones can get kind of noisy, like Slack notifications. Maybe I can just stop notifying. But what's funny is, so I didn't really know if we could do this. I just threw it out there, and then Jay wrote, you know what? Some of these can work, but some of them can't. You can't stop notifying some of them. I didn't say, Jay, make it work. I just said, like, okay, maybe, let's just close it. It's fine.
Yeah, it's an example of like the technical constraints informing the design. So, Jamie had a good idea, but the idea in practice would have been unpredictable, whether you could long press on something and take action. So, given that unpredictability, we changed the design. So, to have a more consistent experience.
And throughout this whole process, it's really a discussion. It's not a directive at all. Like a designer is not directing the programmer, the programmer is not directing the designer. We're just sort of like feeling it out, trying to figure out what's best for the customer and what's best for like our sanity to develop the feature.
Here's another example of another item that we didn't know about. And so this is adding a confirmation dialog when you mark all notifications as read. We had a mark all as read feature before, but given these new notification styles, we didn't know if we should enhance it. And so this is something that we just kind of let sit out in the open until we started layering in all the polish items. And so Jamie,
I just said like, Jay, I think that's a good idea, but I wonder how often that something like that is used. And then I kind of had another idea, and then after a while we were using it, and I just said, you know what, maybe we don't need this extra thing. I think it's just fine to not have a confirmation button.
So we talked about cutting scope, scope hammer, and now on to some of the polish items that we discussed.
So this is one of those things. Again, this is the small details. So we're not doing, this is where we save a lot of time, not making designs perfect at the beginning. Where as we're starting to use the product or the new feature in the app, we can start to see, okay, maybe things should just move around. And so now we're trying to figure out where the timestamp is. And this is where the designer, where I was able to sort of move things around with XML and just see for myself how things were working. And I kind of had an idea, okay, maybe it should be like this. And then I moved all the stuff around because I'm familiar with the XML. But I figured out, okay, this is kind of what I want it to look like. And that saved a lot of time because Jay was working on, I forgot what else he was working on, but he was working on something more important than just moving around text.
So we've gone through building this feature together, really collaborative effort, and just to show you where we ended up, which was same screenshot as we showed you before, the web hey menu on the left here, and then the new Android app on the right. So we've got bundled campfires, we've got a message with more context. You can see there's only one line in the one message, so you know what, I'm just going to clear that. I don't need to tap into it, waste my time. We've got a check in there, and so you can see how the changes actually came to fruition. And here's what it actually, here are all the changes that we actually made.
So now the pings, it's just a lot easier to parse. You can see, okay, instead of having like a little badge there for a direct message, I can actually see what Jay said. And if I had more direct messages, I could see what other people said. Again, the campfires are put together, so I can sort of group them, just like in Inbox, what we loved about that. And this post by Lexi on this side, now I can see, okay, this is something about, her dad had a birthday party, and here are the pictures from that.
Yeah, so you can see how all of our work was centered around our two goals, which was the showing more context and switching context less. So we felt like we zeroed in on that concept, and we were able to achieve that with this work in just a matter of probably week and a half or something.
So a big part of the project was to get buy-in. So again, we kind of developed this in a weird time where it was between projects, and this was sort of like a renegade thing that we did. And what we wanted to make sure that it was okay for the rest of the company that we're going to do something different than iOS and web. So what I did was I posted, again, kind of like a pitch, but more like, here's a pitch, but we actually did it. But it was to the entire company. And what it did was it helped me frame what the idea was, just like when we write a pitch normally. So it was a clear explanation on what this feature did and what the advantages are.
Yeah, and you can see that this wasn't just to one or two people in the company to let them know. This was to the entire company, all 55 people there. And so that's kind of the context of how we present. So you can see here, this is kind of more of the message. Detailed write-up, and it addresses a lot of the everything we set out to achieve there.
And the company, mostly iOS users, were like, hey, this is a great idea. And there were a lot of comments from people that are using both Android and iOS, and they ended up liking the way that we presented it. They feel like they can get through it a lot more.
Yeah, so it's helpful to get feedback, and whether it's publicly or even privately, people feel free to give constructive or just positive feedback. And so this is our buy-in phase. This was right before our meetup, so we wanted to just present the idea so if people had questions, they could talk to us. The next thing was getting QA involved. So this, we have a couple people on the QA team, and we work really closely with them before we want to ship a brand new feature. And part of that is actually a similar write-up in explaining, what our goals were, but more importantly, the things we didn't solve, the open questions that we had. You can see down here, we have a lot of open questions that the QA team is not. We don't just want objective feedback, the subjective feedback of how things work, how customers might view the changes are helpful, and so they're able to give us that additional feedback as well.
And I think actually them being an Android minority company is helpful there because they're able to see it and be like, why is it like this? Or I don't really understand that. And then also, we're a small team. We do all our marketing as well. So we did an announcement, customer-facing announcement on our blog. And what's great about this is because of the process that we had of internal announcements and pitches and kind of framing what this feature is for, it helped us to really hone the message for customers.
Yeah, and it gives us an opportunity to tell customers, our intent on the new feature and why we think it's, a good change. And we don't have to rely on someone else in the company who has really had no hand in the process. Yeah, so this is just more of the announcement showing some of the specific features.
So, again, we recognize that not everybody can have the same process as us. So we want to just leave you with some points to take home. And the first one is try to use real data. I think that's really helpful. As designers, I don't know how you work with designers, but I'm sure that you've seen lorem ipsum before. We try not to use that. We try to use real data. Even if it has to be a Photoshop file, we try to use real data. But if you can get real data to injected into the app, that'd be great.
The other thing is resist doing too much design up front. We've talked about this a lot here, but really is I just need something to hit the ground running in the beginning and show Jamie something. And once we can get our hands on the initial stages, then we continue to actually build the concept from the beginning. So, but if I had a entire design spec up front, it would be hard for me to know what can be changed, what can't. When I run into technical constraints like how much flexibility is there, we don't have to worry about that because we are able to figure it out as we go and let the constraints influence the design.
Iterate quickly too, because if you get a design that's fully formed, you can't change anything. It's harder to change. But if the design is malleable, then you can iterate, you can improve it as you use it.
Other thing is scope hammer, which we talked about. And one of the phrases we have in Basecamp is half, not half-assed. So it's easier or it's much better to ship something with half the features than to try to get all of them in and then not be done well. So that's something that we always keep in mind is we can always layer in more features, but it's much harder to change a perception of something that isn't done well.
And last thing is, what can you ship in 2 weeks? And try to break that road down to something that you can keep the momentum going.
And that's it. Thank you.